I bought 3 orphans with sacks on their heads, then froze when one whispered "Dad." The dust kicked up by my horse's hooves hung in the air like guilt itself, as I rode into Perdition Creek, that sweltering August morning, and I hadn't set foot in this god-forsaken town for 3 years. Not since that terrible night when everything went to hell and I'd ridden out with blood on my hands and shame in my heart. My name is Jeremiah Cross, though most folks who knew me back then called me preacher on account of my Sunday sermonizing. Funny thing about nicknames, they stick to you long after you've lost any right to them. I wasn't much of a preacher anymore, hadn't been since I'd taken to drinking whiskey instead of communion wine and settling disputes with my Colt 45 rather than scripture. The town looked smaller than I remembered, more weathered. The paint on the saloon's false front had peeled away like old scabs, and the general store's sign hung crooked, creaking in the hot wind. But it was the crowd gathered in the town square that drew my attention, and the makeshift auction block that had been erected there. I'd heard tell of such things in other territories, orphan auctions they called them. When the local orphanage couldn't feed all the mouths, or when a settlement was breaking up, they'd auction off the children to whoever could pay for their keep. It was legal after a fashion, though it left a bitter taste in the mouth of any decent person. The children were bound to work for their new families until they came of age, supposedly fed and housed in exchange for their labor. Supposedly. I dismounted and tied my horse to the hitching post, my spurs jangling against the wooden walkway. The crowd was a mix of ranchers, farmers and townspeople, some looking uncomfortable, others eyeing the proceedings with the calculating gaze of livestock buyers. It made my stomach turn. "Ladies and gentlemen," called out a thin man in a dusty black suit, standing beside 3 small figures, "we have here 3 fine children, healthy and strong, ready to serve in good Christian homes." The 3 children stood with burlap sacks over their heads, their small hands bound in front of them. The sight hit me like a kick from a Mustang. Even in this harsh country where life was cheap and children learned to work before they could properly walk, this seemed particularly cruel. "Why the sacks?" called out a woman from the crowd. "Prevents favoritism based on looks," the auctioneer replied smoothly. "You're buying work hands, not pets. What matters is their willingness to obey and their capacity for labor." The smallest of the 3 children couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. The way the child stood, shoulders squared despite obvious fear, reminded me of something or someone. My chest tightened with a feeling I couldn't quite name. "We'll start with the eldest," the auctioneer continued, placing his hand on the shoulder of the tallest child. Approximately 12 years of age, strong back, no known ailments. "Do I hear $10? The bidding was swift and merciless. The boy went for $18 to a rancher who looked him over like he was evaluating a young bull. The second child, perhaps 9 years old, was purchased by a stern-faced woman for $15. Then came the smallest one. "And here we have our final offering," the auctioneer announced. "Young but teachable. Perfect for light household duties and tending small animals. Shall we start at $5? Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the memory of my own childhood, working my fingers bloody on my father's failed farm. Maybe it was the thought of Martha and the children we'd never had. Or maybe it was just that I'd been running from my demons for so long that I'd forgotten there were still things worth saving in this world. $20, I called out, my voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. A hush fell over the gathering. $20 was more than most of these folks saw in a month. $20, the auctioneer repeated, his eyes lighting up. "Do I hear 25? Silence. "Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the black hat." I walked forward, my boots heavy on the packed earth, and handed over the money. The auctioneer removed the sack from the child's head, and I found myself looking down at a small girl with hair the color of prairie wheat and eyes like storm clouds. She couldn't have been more than 7, with a heart-shaped face marked by dirt and defiance. But it was when she looked up at me that my world tilted on its axis. Those eyes, I'd seen them before, looking back at me from Martha's face on our wedding day. The same unusual gray-green color like sage after rain. "Come along," I said quietly, my voice rougher than I'd intended. I untied her hands and gestured toward my horse. As we walked away from the crowd, the child stumbled slightly and I instinctively reached out to steady her. That's when she looked up at me again, studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Mister," she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. What is it, child? Are you my dad? The words hit me like a bullet to the chest. I stopped walking, my hand frozen on her small shoulder, staring down at this little girl who might as well have been a ghost from my past. What did you say? My mama, before she died, she showed me a picture. You look like the man in the picture. She said he was my papa, but that he'd gone away. The world seemed to spin around me. Martha had been with child when I'd left. I'd known that, had carried the guilt of abandoning them both like a stone in my chest. But I'd assumed the worst when I'd heard she died in childbirth. I'd never imagined. What was your mama's name? I asked, my voice barely audible. Martha Elizabeth Cross, she said. She told me my papa's name was Jeremiah, but everyone called him Preacher. My knees nearly buckled. This child, this brave, defiant little girl, was my daughter, my flesh and blood, standing before me in threadbare clothes with dirt under her fingernails and hunger in her eyes. What's your name? I managed to ask. Sarah, she said, Sarah Cross. Though at the orphanage, they called me number 12, Sarah. Martha had always loved that name. I knelt down so I was at eye level with her, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. Sarah, I'm going to take care of you now, I promise. She nodded solemnly as if making a business arrangement. The matron at the orphanage said promises don't mean nothing. She said words are just air. Then I'll show you instead of telling you, I said. We rode out of Perdition Creek in silence, Sarah sitting in front of me on the saddle, her small body tense with uncertainty. I'd bought supplies from the general store, food, a couple of dresses, a warm coat for when winter came. The storekeeper's wife had clucked sympathetically when she saw Sarah, pressing a peppermint stick into her hand when she thought I wasn't looking. My ranch was a half-day's ride north, nestled in a valley between two ridges of red rock. It wasn't much, a modest house, a barn that needed repairs, and grazing land for the small herd of cattle I'd been building. I'd bought the place with money I'd earned driving cattle and breaking horses, trying to build something legitimate after years of living by my gun. As we approached the house, Sarah spoke for the first time since leaving town. Is this where you live? It's where we live now, I corrected her. She considered this. Is it better than the orphanage? What was the orphanage like? Cold. And Mrs. Henderson, she was the matron, she used to hit us with a switch if we didn't work fast enough, and we were always hungry. Rage burned in my chest, hot and sudden. Nobody's going to hit you here, Sarah, and you won't go hungry, I promise. There's that word again, she said, but there was less skepticism in her voice this time. I carried her inside, and she looked around the simple interior with wide eyes. It was clean but sparse, a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area and 2 bedrooms. I'd built most of the furniture myself, rough but sturdy. This is your room, I said, showing her the smaller bedroom. It was empty except for a simple bed and a chest of drawers. She stood in the doorway, not moving. I don't have to share it. No, it's all yours. And I can close the door? Of course. She stepped inside tentatively as if the floorboards might give way beneath her feet. At the orphanage, we slept 6 to a room, and the older boys, they used. She trailed off, but I understood. You're safe here, I said firmly. I'll make sure of it. That first evening, I cooked us a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Sarah ate carefully, as if afraid the food might be taken away. She cleaned her plate and then looked at me hopefully. There's more if you want it, I said. Her eyes widened. Really? As much as you can eat. She had 2 more helpings before finally leaning back in her chair, a look of wonder on her face. I ain't never been full before, she said. Haven't ever, I corrected gently. And you will be from now on. As the days passed, Sarah began to open up like a wild flower after rain. She was bright, curious, and surprisingly resilient. She'd learned to read at the orphanage, one of the few kindnesses they'd shown the children, and she devoured the handful of books I had like a starving person devours bread. She was also a hard worker, insisting on helping with chores despite my protest that she was too young. She gathered eggs from the chickens I kept, helped tend the vegetable garden, and even tried to help with mending, though her small fingers struggled with the needle. I want to earn my keep, she said when I tried to tell her to rest. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, Sarah. You're my daughter. But you left, she said matter-of-factly. If I was good enough, you wouldn't have left. The words cut deep because I couldn't argue with them. I had left. I'd abandoned Martha when she needed me most, running like a coward when trouble came calling. I made a mistake, I said. The biggest mistake of my life. I should have stayed. I should have fought for your mother. For you. Why didn't you? How could I explain to a 7-year-old the choices that had driven me away? How could I tell her about Sheriff Coleman's corruption? About the innocent man I'd been forced to shoot? About the warrant that had been issued for my arrest? How could I make her understand that I'd thought leaving was the only way to keep Martha safe? I was scared, I said finally, and I thought it was better for everyone if I went away. Were you scared of me? No, sweetheart, never of you. I was scared of the kind of man I was becoming. I was scared I'd hurt the people I loved. She pondered this for a long moment. And now I'm still scared, I admitted, but I'm more scared of losing you again. 3 weeks after I'd brought Sarah home, trouble found us. I was working in the barn when I heard horses approaching, too many horses, moving too fast. I grabbed my rifle and stepped outside to see 6 men on horseback surrounding the house. I recognized the lead rider immediately. Sheriff Coleman looked older than when I'd last seen him, his face more weathered and his hair gone gray at the temples, but the cruel intelligence in his eyes was unchanged. Well, he called out. Jeremiah Cross, I heard you might be back in these parts. Coleman, I kept my rifle ready but not aimed. This is a peaceful ranch. I don't want any trouble. Trouble seems to follow you though, doesn't it, preacher? He dismounted, his hand resting on his gun butt. I've got a warrant here that's 3 years old. Still valid. For what? Murder. You shot down Deputy Harris in cold blood. Harris was about to kill an innocent man. I stopped him. Your word against a dead man's reputation. Coleman smiled, and it was like watching a snake bare its fangs. Course, we might be able to work something out. I hear you've been keeping company with one of them orphan children. Ice flooded my veins. Leave the girl out of this. Pretty little thing from what I hear. Shame if something was to happen to her. These roads can be dangerous for children traveling alone. The threat was clear and rage burned in my chest like a forge fire. But before I could respond, I heard the front door open behind me. Pop. Sarah's voice was small and scared. She stood in the doorway, clutching a rag doll I'd bought her in town. Go back inside, honey, I said without taking my eyes off Coleman. But those men look angry. It's going to be all right. Just go back inside and wait for me. She disappeared into the house, and Coleman chuckled. Smart girl, knows when to obey her betters. What do you want, Coleman? Same thing I've always wanted. Respect, and payment for past debts. He gestured to his men, who began to spread out around the yard. See, that little incident 3 years ago cost me a deputy. Good men are hard to find. Harris wasn't a good man. He was a killer. He was my killer, Coleman said. And now I need a new one. So here's my offer. You work for me, and I'll tear up this war. You refuse, and that little girl becomes an orphan again, permanently. I'd been in tight spots before, but never with so much to lose. These weren't men I could outdraw or outfight. They were predators, and Sarah was in the house behind me, helpless, entrusting me to protect her. How do I know you'll keep your word? I asked. You don't, but you know what happens if you refuse. I was about to lower my rifle when I heard it, the distinctive click of a shotgun being cocked. I glanced back to see Sarah standing in the doorway again, but this time she wasn't empty-handed. She was holding my old double barrel, the one I kept loaded beside the door. You leave my papa alone, she said, her young voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Coleman laughed. Little wildcat, ain't she? Put that down, girl, before you hurt your Sarah, go back inside, I said urgently. No, she said firmly. I ain't losing you again. Haven't, I corrected automatically, and despite everything she almost smiled. Coleman started to step forward, and Sarah swung the shotgun toward him. It was almost too heavy for her to handle, but her intent was clear. I know how to use this, she said. Papa taught me. I hadn't, but I was grateful for the lie. Cute, Coleman said. But little girls shouldn't play with guns. He took another step, and that's when everything went to hell. Sarah pulled the trigger. The shotgun roared like thunder, and Coleman dove sideways, cursing. The blast went wide, but the surprise of it gave me the opening I needed. I brought my rifle up and put a bullet in the nearest rider before he could clear leather. Get down, I shouted to Sarah as Coleman's men opened fire. She dropped behind the doorframe as bullets chewed up the wood around her. I rolled behind the water trough and started returning fire, trying to keep them from reaching the house. It was 6 against 1, and the odds weren't in my favor. I managed to wing another rider, but they were spreading out, trying to flank me. In a few minutes, they'd have me surrounded. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, More gunfire, but from behind Coleman's men. 4 riders came over the ridge, shooting fast and accurate. I recognized the lead rider immediately. Marshal Tom Patterson, an old friend from my circuit riding days. Coleman's men found themselves caught in crossfire, and the fight went out of them quick. 2 more went down, and the survivors threw down their guns and raised their hands. Coleman himself was on his knees, blood staining his shirt where Sarah's wild shot had caught him with a stray pellet. Jeremiah Cross, Marshal Patterson called out as he rode up, "Heard you might need some help, Tom." I stood slowly, keeping my rifle ready. "How'd you know?" "Got a telegram from Judge Harrison. Seems someone's been doing some investigating into Sheriff Coleman's activities. Found evidence he's been running a protection racket, stealing from the county treasury, and worse." He pulled out a folded paper. "I've got a warrant here, but it's not for you, it's for him." Coleman snarled, something unprintable, but Patterson ignored him. "Your name's been cleared, preacher. Deputy Harris was dirty, just like you said. The man you saved came forward with evidence. Course it would have been easier if you'd stuck around to testify. I had my reasons for leaving. I know you did, but you're clear now, free and clear." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I'd carried for 3 long years, but it was Sarah's voice that mattered most. "Papa, is it over?" I turned to see her standing in the doorway again, the shotgun safely set aside. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were bright with hope. "It's over, honey," I said, kneeling down as she ran to me. "We're safe now." She threw her arms around my neck, and I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling my heart whole for the first time since Martha died. "I was scared," she whispered. "Me too," I admitted, "but we're going to be all right." Marshal Patterson and his men hauled Coleman and his surviving deputies away, leaving Sarah and me alone as the sun set behind the red rock ridges. We sat on the porch steps, watching the stars come out one by one. "Papa," Sarah said sleepily, leaning against my shoulder. "What is it, sweetheart? Are you really going to stay this time?" I thought about all the years I'd lost, all the running I'd done from my problems and my past. I thought about Martha, and how she'd have wanted me to raise our daughter with love and courage instead of fear. "I'm never leaving you again," I said. "That's a promise." "Words are just air," she said, but she was smiling when she said it. "Then I'll show you every day for the rest of my life." She nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes. "I love you, Papa." "I love you too, Sarah." More than all the stars in the sky, as I carried my daughter inside and tucked her into her bed, I thought about the strange turns life could take. I'd come back to Perdition Creek, carrying old guilt and older pain. I'd left with something I'd never expected to find: redemption, and a future worth fighting for. The little girl who'd called me dad in that dusty town square had given me more than I'd given her. She'd given me back my soul, and that was worth more than all the gold in California. Epilogue. 10 years later, Sarah Cross graduated from the Territorial School as valedictorian, the first in our county to earn a scholarship to the Teachers College back east. She was beautiful and brilliant, with her mother's eyes and a strength that was all her own. On the day she left for college, she hugged me tight on the platform of the train station. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For keeping your promise, for showing me instead of just telling me." As I watched the train disappear into the distance, carrying my daughter toward her bright future, I thought about that day in Perdition Creek when 3 orphans had stood on an auction block with sacks over their heads. Sometimes the best things in life come to us in the most unlikely way. Sometimes salvation wears a burlap sack and calls you dad in a voice so quiet you almost miss it. Sometimes broken men find wholeness in the love of a child who refuses to let them run away from who they could become. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance to be the father you should have been from the start. I built a good life in that valley between the red rock ridges. Sarah came back after college, and taught school in town for 2 years before marrying a good man, a lawyer who treated her like the treasure she was. I lived to see my grandchildren born and to tell them stories of the Old West, carefully editing out the darker chapter. But I never forgot that August morning when I bought 3 orphans with sacks on their heads, or the moment when one small voice changed everything with a single whispered word. Dad, the most beautiful word in any language, when spoken with love and hope instead of fear.